You know, I have friends who haven't worked in 5 years. I know families who survive on food stamps. We need work. I have a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and one on the way. And they're gonna have jobs when they get older, right here in Pennsylvania.
If Corey O'Brien can bring back trust by instituting a code of ethics his first day as county commissioner and balance the budget without raising taxes or cutting services, he can bring back jobs and hope as congressman.
I'm Corey O'Brien, and I approve this ad.
Should Brian be spending his time more on the airport and stuff like that, or should he be out there defending the stimulus?
Dan, everything that all three folks, Brian and Steve and Nate, have all said, is really what you have to kind of weed your way through in order to run a good campaign in this year. There's no question that when you're running for Congress, you're dealing with national issues. You must do that. But there's also no question, and this is the balance we're all talking about. What do you do about a large manufacturing company in your district that's having trouble or going out of business? You really have to deal with that as well. Steve, I don't think, I agree with you. It's not a false choice when you're talking about deficit and talking about jobs. The question is, which one is the priority that you have to take? I mean, the governor and former mayor of Philadelphia, when he first came into Philly, if you recall, in 1992, the city was broke, but yet the city had to give services and it had to, show pride. It had to try and get businesses to come here. And what he said was, when I walked in here, my patient was on the gurney, and the patient, the city of Philadelphia, had cancer, and it also had a gunshot wound. So what do you do first? And maybe I think what we're talking about with deficit and with jobs, in my estimation, in my opinion, I think we have to try to treat jobs now, and then don't forget that it's not a false choice. The deficit is there. We have to try and work with that at the same time. But let's get the country working.
Government spending, economic growth comes from increased productivity. I think everybody would agree with that. Giving more money and more power to the government as opposed to people and private enterprise does not create economic growth, because it's putting money in inefficient places and taking it away from efficient places. And that's why, as you continue to put more money and more power in Washington, and again, I'm not saying this has happened over the last year, this has happened over the last decade, you see a process by which you're starving the private industry, and you're putting them in, you're putting them in an uncompetitive advantage and asking them to compete in a global environment. It's like tying a runner's feet together and saying and then yelling at them because they're not winning the race. American entrepreneurs are the most innovative in the entire world. We cannot, though, straddle them and tie weights to their feet and ask them to win the race.
And this is the campaign manager's dilemma this year.
Well, let's not worry about the campaign. Let's worry about what policies.
I hear you. I understand what you're talking about.
Part of the problem on the spending issue is that we have two parties that are fighting to some extent over the small stuff. I heard some candidates the other night talking about how if they're elected to Congress, they're not going to take any earmarks. Well, earmarks represent 1.7% of the budget considered in Congress last year. Earmarks aren't really the problem. The problem are some of those big items that nobody has the courage to go and touch. And I was just looking at this tonight for something unrelated item. I just saw this thing: 44.4% of all U.S. tax dollars in the 2009 budget were allocated to military and defense spending. I mean, this is a number that's too big to let go. And if we're going to be on the Republican side, fiscal conservatives, we got to go after that budget as well, and we have to let voters know that we're willing to put everything out on the table. And having a discussion over piddling earmark appropriations that don't amount to much instead of the behemoth, the 500-pound gorilla in the room, Republicans have to get pretty serious about that.
Well, and I go back to the fiscal commission. You're exactly right. We're talking about spending money on infrastructure. It's not just that the government needs to spend money on our infrastructure, which will create jobs. Our infrastructure is in big trouble. We have in the state of Pennsylvania something like 6,000 structurally deficient bridges. Meanwhile, in China, where much of the country still lacks indoor plumbing, they're building a train system which has trains go over 200 miles per hour. Well, we should be making those kinds of investments, and if we make those kinds of investments, will it add to the deficit? Yes, but we will not cure the deficit unless we take on the tough issues, like the fact that 46 cents of every dollar goes to healthcare costs, like the fact that Medicare and Medicaid are unsustainable, like the fact that Social Security is now operating in the red. Well, we had an opportunity, again, I'll come back to it, in the Senate to create a fiscal commission that would have dealt with those issues. We are not going to do anything about the deficit unless we as Republicans and Democrats face that fact. Everything else is just nibbling around the edges. And to say that we can't spend money on important things like infrastructure and clean energy jobs and competing with the rest of the world because it's the deficit, but we're not going to talk about the defense budget, we're not going to talk about the Medicare and Medicaid and all that money. That's another issue. We'll deal with that later. Nonsense. That is the deficit.
Well, you
and that is what the weight around the people's feet is.
Well,
that's that for.
You know, I have friends who haven't worked in 5 years. I know families who survive on food stamps. We need work. I have a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and one on the way. And they're gonna have jobs when they get older, right here in Pennsylvania.
If Corey O'Brien can bring back trust by instituting a code of ethics his first day as county commissioner and balance the budget without raising taxes or cutting services, he can bring back jobs and hope as congressman.
I'm Corey O'Brien, and I approve this ad.